안녕하세요. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I'm just putting on my alarm because I usually talk for very long. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm going to try and talk slowly because I can't speak Korean yet, but I'm trying. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the blockchain, but before we talk about the blockchain, I'm going to introduce who R3 is, and then I'm going to talk to you about the blockchain in context of what's being called the fourth industrial revolution, which is quite exciting. So just real quick before we go on, I think there's a pointer here. So R3, perhaps I can turn this guy on. Hello? Hello, hello? Ah, cool. So R3 was formed last year back in September, and in September we had 42 members that joined, and by the end of November we had 42, and then by March we had 70-odd people, 70-odd banks. Today we have about 76, and you would have seen, of course, in the news in the last week or so about some members deciding to invest elsewhere, and I will address that at the end of this talk. But first I wanted to talk to you about the membership, and I also wanted to talk to you about kind of the blockchain, which is the exciting part. So as you can see, lots of members, of course. The banks in Korea, we have 5 members here, which we were very happy to have. And thank you, Shinhan, for hosting this session here today. So before we get started, a quick quote from Klaus Schwab, who runs the World Economic Forum. And this is a very big statement. So we stand at the brink of a technological revolution, which we expect will change everything. It's a huge period in our lives where we believe that the fabric of our society will be fundamentally affected, and humankind itself will be transformed. The way that we feel, the way that we interact with other people, and the way that we interact with ourselves will fundamentally change at an accelerated rate in the next 10 to 20 years. So let's just understand really what that means from, bear with me, this thing, okay. Pretty fundamental view of how the world's about to change. And we've seen over the course of the last 5 years a lot of these technologies emerging, the likes of artificial intelligence, the likes of quantum computing, the likes of quantum computing starting to emerge, really being able to attain quantum, which is fascinating. The Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything, as we've seen, by 2020, 30 billion devices connected to the internet, including our pets, our children, our homes, everything, which is going to be fascinating. Everything from a needle to an airplane will be connected. So we fundamentally believe that what's upon us today is like nothing we've ever seen before. And it's our responsibility to better understand what's happening and to help guide the changes so that it's fruitful for everybody, a balanced equality. And of course, the blockchain was born out of a view of libertarianism, a view that we can shift power from industry, from governments, from banks, to the people on the street, and allow people on the street to govern themselves and be able to transfer value without anyone knowing what you were doing. So let's just kind of review a little bit. Kind of the World Economic Forum was released just a few months ago, and there's 150 odd pages of research, and not one page has the word blockchain. There's no blockchain mentioned in the World Economic Forum. Instead, it's this word that we've now come to know as distributed ledger. A distributed ledger technology is very different to a blockchain, and I'll explain just the differences as I go through this talk. But I think it's very important for us to understand that difference here today, and I'll explain the reasons why. Now, the blockchain is not a panacea. By itself, it will not deliver the promise that we are seeing. It requires it is one of many different technologies that are emerging, as we've seen, and as we'll talk about today. And it's the confluence of these technologies that we believe will give us exponential opportunities. The other kind of big call out is it requires very deep collaboration, and we're starting to see that, right? It does sometimes feel awkward for us to be sitting in a room with banks that are competitive, trying to figure out how we work together, but it is fundamentally important that we continue to do this, right? So we've seen kind of the trajectory of time. The internet, of course, drove huge fundamental differences and changes to the fabric of business and society. And we'll cover a little bit more of those in a minute. But the stack of technologies, and these are just some of them, some of the technologies that we're seeing emerge, are kind of called out here, which is really these technologies that are accelerating and taking us into this fourth industrial revolution. So, of course, distributed ledger technology is one of those components, and I kind of like to think about this as kind of the new data layer, right? You could argue that cloud computing and the Internet of Things is the new network layer, quantum is the new compute layer, and DLT is the new data layer, the way that we capture data and the way that we transfer data across networks, right? But it's smart data. It comes with rules, it comes with logic, and it comes with this notion of truth, right? So let's just look at that for a second. So just to recap real quick, the fourth industrial revolution, mechanization of the world, right? The first cogs of machinery, mass production, Henry Ford and the car, right? The Model T Ford was mass produced and the factory was born. Computers and automation, of course, the dawn of the digital age. And then here, as we see cyber-physical systems, really the confluence and the bringing together of physical, digital, and biological systems, right? So a fascinating confluence of what's happening. We see robotics and artificially intelligent machines starting to perforate our lives, cars, our phones, right? Starting to talk to us, starting to interact with us. The very small, the early beginnings of us accepting machines and robots in our lives, right? A fundamental shift. So let's just address this difference of blockchains and distributed ledgers and shared ledgers. We see a lot of this in the words that we read, and sometimes this confusion. So it's important for us to be really clear on the difference between a blockchain and a distributed ledger. So a blockchain, a distributed ledger, and a shared ledger, a blockchain is what we always talk about. This notion of, a distributed network where data is automatically replicated across all the nodes in a network. Now that works for some use cases, but it does not work for financial services, and it does not work for highly regulated environments. Enter the distributed ledger technology. A distributed ledger is like a blockchain, but it does not share data to all the nodes in the network. Right? That's a fundamental difference. the data is only shared between two transacting parties and any other need-to-know nodes. So for example, if I was making a transaction with another bank, only myself and that bank would know that transaction, as well as the regulators, as well as the consensus nodes and maybe notary nodes. But my data wouldn't be shared with other banks globally. So I can retain sovereignty, I can retain data privacy, and I configure the way the data is shared. R3 is building a distributed ledger technology, which is the world's first fit-for-purpose distributed ledger technology called Corda, and I'll talk a little bit about Corda at the end of this talk. And then a shared ledger is a little bit like a spreadsheet in the cloud, right, where we all share this notion of a shared ledger, and it's not replicated, it's just shared, it's a single instance, but it's out there, it's in the cloud, and we can all see kind of this notion of kind of a single source of truth. And then a few attributes that are really key attributes of a distributed ledger technology. So the first, of course, is this notion of consensus, right? Consensus is trying to reach kind of truth and agreement. And there's many different types of consensus. We've seen that Bitcoin has proof of work, Ethereum has proof of stake. All these consensus algorithms carry with it their own kind of challenges, as we've seen around scalability. But consensus is arguably the #1 key attribute of a distributed ledger. The ability for a computer system or a network to reach consensus without a human being. Very fundamental point. And this notion that, you know, I see what you see, and I know that what I see is what you see, right? This notion of truth. Validity being that given proposed update to the system is valid, that if I update a truth, that truth is valid. There could be several truths, and we need to be able to find the right truth. I could pay someone $10, I could pay someone else the same $10. Which one is the truth? Which one is the true statement, the true transaction? Fundamental point. Uniqueness, right? Something that we all agree on. So what is the unique transaction? This notion of double spend, right? We've been able to now solve this. Immutability. Of course, this is probably one of the strongest points as well. You know, once I write a truth into the ledger, it can never be removed. Now, technically, that's not necessarily true, because once committed, essentially what I'm saying is data once committed cannot be changed. This isn't quite true. What is true is that if I have a piece of data, then of course I can change it, but what we actually mean is that once it's committed, nobody else will accept a transaction from me if it doesn't build on the block, right? Because this notion of looking back at the block to see what truth is. And then authentication. So all transactions carry with it a public key, a secured public key and a private key that locks that transaction. So let's just look at kind of what's about to happen. We talked about this notion of kind of the fourth industrial revolution with a stack of technologies, but let's understand what the distributed ledger technology is going to do for society, for our businesses. So before the internet, back in kind of the 1950s, 1960s, our businesses were pretty siloed. We all performed different actions. We all tried to kind of contain this notion of truth. What is the truth? What is the perception of what I see? Making sure that what I see is what you see. And then we all have this processing logic in our businesses. The reconciliation logic that once I've done a transaction, I keep a record of my books, but I also keep a record of your books, right? So we have to understand each other's ledgers. So I have this replicated logic that I maintain. And of course, communication. Very difficult to do without the internet. We were doing this with postal services for the most part, and telephones. Enter the internet, and the communication layer was collapsed. We were able to communicate with people around the world in the matter of seconds, you know, and the dawn of e-commerce was born, and we were able to transfer kind of communication and data across the internet at light speed, or at internet speed. Completely changed our universe, completely changed the world. And today, the internet is permeated in every aspect of our lives, right? In your pocket is one of the strongest machines that we've ever had, right? What we're about to see is something pretty amazing, pretty fundamental, in that not only will we have this shared communication layer, but we will have shared processing logic. This notion of smart contracts, if you've heard of smart contracts, the ability to take logic and make that a contract and put that onto the network that processes what was once on either side of the transaction on the network itself. Fundamental, a huge shift. And of course, the biggest of all, the ability to capture truth. Without each node having to try to maintain that truth, we can now capture truth in the network. This is huge, right? Where we spend thousands, millions and millions of dollars in escrow services, in third-party services, trying to maintain this notion of truth. We can now maintain it on the network in a peer-to-peer network. So again, this fundamental statement of, I know that what I see is what you see, right? Without having to kind of spend an enormous amount of money on these things. So just understanding kind of the quantum benefit of what we're about to see. These figures were derived from a piece of work, analysis work from McKinsey. McKinsey was engaged by R3 a while ago, and actually by the banks within R3 to come up with an objective view as to, well, how much money can we actually save? I mean, what's the benefit of actually exploring distributed ledger technologies? And we got to a figure of $2.6 trillion on operating costs across the entire world. All the financial services industry, including our regulators, including first tier, second tier, third tier, capital markets, it's a huge figure. And of that figure, 171 billion in asset management, and then 60 to 80 billion in just 4 use cases that we're exploring. Just 4 of them. Now, we all know what they are. We've seen a lot of news about these things. AML and KYC, right? Identity. It's one of the biggest opportunities that we have in distributed ledger technology, and it carries with it an enormous amount of opportunity. But it also carries with it a fundamental shift of power, where power will shift from institutions to individuals. And we have to really understand what that means. So AML is a really exciting opportunity. Of course, this cross-border payments that we're all trying to capture, right? If anyone does cross-border payments, you'll know how difficult it is and how expensive it is. And there's no reason for it. There's technically no reason for the costs that we pay for cross-border payments. Repos and OTC derivatives and capital markets, another really good kind of space for exploration, enormous amounts of opportunity with respect to smart contracts to automate this world and this world. So some pretty big figures there, and of course we are exploring within R3. There's about 30 projects going on at the moment. Currently at the moment we've already completed about 30, and most of these projects are exploring some of these aspects. So just to give you some illustrative use cases, this is by no means exhaustive, but this is kind of some of the things that we've seen and some of the projects that a lot of the banks within R3 are exploring. And I've highlighted, of course, AML, KYC. Trade finance is huge. It's a massive opportunity. And in fact, in trade finance, this is where we start to see the confluence of some of these emerging technologies. Some of you would have seen the news about the Commonwealth Bank of Australia working with Wells Fargo in sending cotton from America to China. And that ship that had 88 cotton bales had a sensor in it that was telling a smart contract where in the world it was and sending a message to the smart contract to make payments along the way so long as the boat was on time. If the boat is delayed, it would actually make other payments to kind of counter the insurance risk and the supply risk for the cotton to arrive in China. This happened just a few weeks ago. The bringing together of the Internet of Things with smart contracts to be able to automate and de-risk the supply chain of cotton. Right? This is a fascinating opportunity, and it's real world, it's happening today. Cross-border payments, of course, we've seen Ripple in the marketplace for 3 years now, trying to capture that opportunity. There's many other opportunities for cross-border payments. One of the things that we have to tackle is this issue of cryptocurrency and the risk of cryptocurrency doing our settlement. There are other opportunities for settlement and clearing, and R3 is exploring what these are and some of the projects that we're doing. Project Ubin, which was announced in Singapore last week with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. They are deeply involved in Project Ubin, and we are exploring this notion of cross-border with 10 global banks. And this one is really exciting, the ability for regulatory reporting, fraud detection, and compliance. For the regulators in the room, the world is about to change for you. Where before you've been outside, arguably you've been outside of the network, and you get pieces of information from the industry in order to understand any fraud, any compliance risk, and to do your reporting. Tomorrow, you'll be part of the network. You'll be involved in the conversation, and you'll be using artificial intelligence in order to look for anomalies in the network, anomalies of data, things that give you kind of pointers to where risk might be, and predictive analytics that can tell you that a certain person will commit a certain fraudulent exercise or some nefarious activity in some way. A huge change to kind of how regulation will work. And in Australia, we are working with the AML KYC regulator to bring that to life. So Corda, let's just talk a little bit about this distributed ledger technology that's fit for purpose for financial services industry. Of course, the Bitcoin is an anonymous public network, so we can't use that guy. Ethereum, again, is a public network. We can't use that guy. So we had to invent something within R3 that we felt was fit for purpose for financial services industry. And in the next 5 days, Corda will be released to the open source community. So everyone who's in the room that's technical, if there are folks that are technical, you'll be able to download Corda and start using Corda, right? So what is Corda? Well, Corda is not a blockchain. As I explained earlier, it's a distributed ledger technology, and it has certain properties that make it aligned to financial services. So, we are looking at agreements. We don't share data across everybody. And the design of the Corda enables the regulator to be part of the conversation from day one. We have nodes in Corda that represent all the regulators globally. So for the regulators in the room, you will be able to participate on the network as a first-class citizen. Our focus is on agreements. The problem that we're trying to solve is this problem of this challenge of financial agreements. How do we achieve truth when a transaction is performed? And that's what we're going to tackle. And of course, we're going to link in the legal aspects of these legal agreements, so that if there is disputes, the network, of course, will perform certain actions. But if there are disputes, we will fall back to legal prose, to legal tender. Some of you may have seen the DAO from Ethereum. A DAO, there was obviously a huge crash in the DAO. A smart contract was released onto the Ethereum network, and some folks kind of exposed a backdoor in that smart contract and reaped out millions of dollars. That was not an issue of the network. So Ethereum, the network, was not compromised. That was an issue of a piece of code, a smart contract that was written on the network, and there was no fallback to any legal prose or any, as we call it, throat to choke. We certainly will not allow that in Corda, and this notion of allowing us to link to legal prose will ensure that if there are any defaults, if there are any issues, we will be able to fall back to legal. And of course, we're taking into account this notion of how do we integrate this into our current systems? How do we make it real, right? Because we can't just build something on the side without acknowledging the fact that we've spent years and years and years and millions of dollars building our current systems. So just a quick picture to give you an idea of what Corda might look like. And this is just a conceptual view of Corda. So Corda is the base architecture layer down at the bottom, and on top of Corda, this red dotted line is what I like to call kind of the app store for Corda. So here is the kernel, a little bit like Linux, the Linux kernel that you plug in, and then the app store will have certain components that are critical. Identity being obviously the number one thing that we have to solve. The issuance of value, the ability for me to transfer any type of value between point A and point B. Trade registry, the ability for me to have a registry for all the trades and all the transactions that we do, and of course an asset registry for all the assets that you're transferring and that you're trading on. A very simple view of the world, and of course a really big kind of component that talks to interoperability and the interoperability of other ledger systems that are emerging, Ethereum, Ripple chain, and all the others. And of course, existing market services and core systems for our financial services members. Above the App Store, of course, will be all the apps that we're building. So trade finance, capital markets, cross-border payments, anything of value that we'll start to build. And this is what R3's journey is about in the next 3 years. In the next 3 years, we will build out the App Store for financial services, and we'll be able to build apps on this fabric. So some key global projects, just so as you guys know kind of what's going on. So Project Dubin, I talked about, and Project Dubin was announced by the Monetary Authority of Singapore last week. And what Singapore is trying to do is it wants to be the first country in the world to represent the Singapore currency as a digital token on the network. They are working with 10 global banks, right, across the world, and they are very aggressive in bringing this opportunity to market. The next stage of this project, once Singapore is able to put their currency as a digital token on the network, is to talk about how then they transfer that token cross-border. So Australia is on the same path. So imagine what's happening. You've got Singapore trying to represent their currency on a network as a digital token. You've got Australia trying to do exactly the same thing. And then, of course, the natural progression will be, well, how do I transfer these digital tokens when there's a cross-border payment without an additional cryptocurrency to do the exchange? So this is the solution that we have within R3 in order to mitigate the risk of cryptocurrency kind of exposure and risk. So a really big project. For those of you in the room that are members, so Shinhan, obviously you have access to this. For those folks that are not members, do reach out to us if you do want more information. This is one of the most exciting projects that's going on around the world today. And of course, the other one, which is Jasper. Jasper was Canada. Canada kind of drove this thinking maybe 6 months ago. And Ubin is a progression of Jasper. Jasper, again, trying to put the Canadian dollar on a network and try to create kind of national settlement and clearing. A national settlement and clearing system that settles in T0, right? So today I understand clearing here is pretty good, but you know, we still do have clearing and settlement issues in capital markets where we've got a T+2 kind of settlement time. So folks, I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavor as to kind of what's going on in digital ledger technologies around the world, but also more importantly, how digital technology is really in context of a much bigger stack of emerging technologies that is really going to change the world and change kind of the very fabric of humankind, as I suggested. So before I go on, sorry, the last project here, Project Xenon. Project Xenon was cross-border. It was a really big project that we ran with Ripple, trying to really understand whether Ripple was an opportunity. And you know, it holds promise. And there is continued exploration in Ripple and other technologies for cross-border. So thank you very much. Before I dial out, though, I just wanted to mention one thing in terms of what we've heard in the news over the last couple of weeks about the likes of Goldman Sachs deciding to leave R3. And what I can tell you is that, you know, there are folks in the membership that are more powerful, more aggressive than others. And Goldman Sachs was looking for a favorable board position and wanted to kind of have kind of a leading spot on the board of R3, as some others did as well. And the ethos of R3 is to be collaborative and equal, so to have equality across all members. We can't have some members dictate to others kind of what the future of this technology will be, what the future of this fabric will be. So we got to a position where we had terms and conditions that allowed the governance of R3 to be fair and equitable, and some members have decided that that doesn't give them the position that they'd like, which is absolutely fine. We accept that, we respect that. What I can tell you is that over 90% of the members that we have given us positive intention to move forward to investment in the new year and continue to explore with R3. So we will continue to add members. We will take the 90+ members that we have today into the next evolution of R3, and we're looking forward to working with you guys here in Korea, and thank you very much.
반갑습니다. 지금 그 연사가 하신 부분들을 좀 간략하게 정리해서 같이 공유를 한번 하도록 하겠습니다. 예, 시작은 R33 리뷰에 대한 그 현황을 좀 보여준 것 같고요. 네, 지금 현재는 글로벌하게 한 76개 정도의 뱅크, 그리고 우리나라도 하나은행과 신한은행이 거기에 속해 있고, 궁극적으로 지향하는 바는 결국은 휴먼카인트에 해당되고 있는 모든 전송에 해당되는 것들을, 그러니까 그 금융 서비스 전송을 이야기한 것 같고요. 그다음에 간략하게 영상을 통해서 4차 산업혁명에 대한 빠른 변화를 좀 잠깐 보여주신 것 같고, 그래서 이제 그다음에는 이제 블록체인의 변화 쪽에 해당되는 거를 이야기를 했는데, 블록체인을 결국은 분산 원장, 디스트리뷰 레저를 통해서 지금은 쉐어드 레저, 결국은 분배하는 레저에 대한 기능에 대한 변화를 이야기해 주신 것 같습니다. 이와 같은 쉐어드 레저로 갈 때에 대한 5가지 중요한 포인트를 얘기해 주셨고요. 첫째는 컨센서스, 두 번째는 밸리데이션, 세 번째는 유일성, 유니크니스, 그다음에 non-liquidations에 있는 immovability, 그리고 마지막에는 사용자 신분 확인에 해당되는 authentication의 키팩터를 얘기해 줬고요. 그다음에 은행 입장으로 보았을 때 사용할 수 있는 다양한 케이스에 대한 트레이딩에 해당되는 중요 이슈에 대한 발전, 그리고 화두가 되고 있는 에스크로우나 3자 파티에 대해서 공유하고 동의하는 기술의 발전 방향을 이야기했었습니다. 그리고 맥킨지에 의한 파이낸스 서비스에 대한 점점 커지는 부분에 대한 변화를 이야기해 줬고요. 그다음에 다양한 유저 케이스를 통해서 결국 뭐 예를 들면 트레이드 파이낸스라든가 크로스 보더 페이먼트 등에 해당돼서 적용 방안에 대한 것들을 설명을 해주셨고요. 현실적으로 그 암호화 화폐에 대한 문제점이나 대응 방안에 대한 한 획으로 코다에 대한 출연에 대한 이야기를 했었고요. 코다는 한마디로 파이낸스 서비스 모델에 가장 적합한 모델로서 블록체인을 그냥 빌딩하는 것이 아니라 어글리먼트, 더 정확하게 말하면은 파이낸스의 관계에 대해서 이고가고 있는 모든 지적, 법적 동의를 이끌어낼 수 있는 기본적인 모델이 될 수 있을 것 같다라고 이야기를 했고요. 뭐 조만간에 오픈 소스로 활용을 할 수 있다라는 얘기도 같이 해주셨고요. 그다음에 이와 같은 코다에 대한 위치를 이야기해 주셨죠, 기술적으로. 그래서 베이지컬리 아키텍처의 가장 밑단에 해당되는 부분으로서 이와 같은 것들을 활용해서 다양한 서비스, 예를 들면 밸류라든가 자산에 대한 등록, 그리고 실제로 금융거래가 일어나는 법적, 지적 어글리먼트를 활용할 수 있는 어떤 퍼블릭 모델에 해당되는 것들을 제안해 줬고요. 마지막으로 이루어지고 있는 글로벌 서세스풀 스토리, 키 글로벌 프로젝트에 해당되는 것들을 한 3가지 정도 소개해 주신 것 같습니다. 어빈 프로젝트라는 걸 통해서 호주에서 현실적으로 아시아에서 쓰이고 있는 디지털 캐시에 해당되고 있는 케이스 스타딩을 설명해 줬고요. 그리고 제스퍼라고 얘기하는 캐시온 레저 케이스를 통해서 국가 간의 협업으로 사용될 수 있는 가능성도 제시를 했었고, 마지막으로 제논이라는 걸 통해서 은행 간의 인터뱅크에 쓸 수 있는 이와 같은 레저의 세틀먼트에 대한 가능성을 소개해 주신 거라고 이해를 하고 있습니다. 제가 전문 트랜슬레이터는 아니고 성신여대에 있는 교수인데요. 그래도 좀 미흡하게나마 잠깐 도움이 되고자 말씀을 드렸습니다. 감사합니다.